Hey, what's up, guys? We're going to do something a little bit different this Friday. Usually I go live and take your calls and stuff like that at 5 o'clock. But this Friday, I just want to give you something a little bit different to check out. Um, the subject matter is pretty serious, okay? So I ask that you watch all of it, absorb it, and if you have any questions, any comments, of course, but any questions specifically for me or the guest that I'm speaking with, please put them down in the comments section here in this YouTube video. But uh, for those of you who don't know, last November, my brother Anthony died. And I've talked about it a little bit on my channel and on my social media. I haven't talked about it a whole lot because it's been too painful. But um, I'm fighting later this month here in Atlanta at a charity event, and it all ties in with my brother because I'm fighting to honor Anthony's memory. I haven't really told you guys what happened there, and I'm going to give you all the details later on. I'm starting to finally open up and talk about it a little bit publicly. You'll be seeing some articles posted on a couple different sites coming up, previewing my fight where I started talking to people. So you guys will get to read some of the background, and I'll share details with you. But basically what happened is he died from a drug overdose. Okay, he died from a fentanyl overdose specifically. And Anthony suffered from mental health issues and drug addiction issues and alcoholism for much of his adult life. And I went to great lengths last summer to save him from, he was in a really, really bad situation, and it was getting pretty rough. And I did everything I could, and some family members chipped in, tried to help out, and in the end, it just wasn't enough. And he died from drug overdose. And when I decided I was going to fight, I didn't know where I was going to fight, what event. I just decided I'm going to start training, and in 2021, I'm going to fight to honor Anthony's memory. I'm going to do this. I've been close to competing so many times, but I've always let life get in the way, and I just never followed through. And I told myself, no matter what happens in 2021, whatever life throws at me, I'm going to follow through, and I'm going to finish this, and I'm going to do this for my brother to honor him. He loved boxing just the way I do. And hopefully this will help me kind of turn this page and move on to a new chapter in my life. And it just so happened that Terry Moss, a promoter here in Atlanta who runs the Buckhead Fight Club gym, very successful with that. She puts on shows regularly, amateur and pro. She does a charity event here that she calls Corporate Fight Night. So she told me about that, and her publicist Amy Green hooked us up, and they told me about this event, and they raise money for charity. And we found a charity here in Atlanta that helps people, a facility that helps people with mental health and addiction issues, the very same things that took my brother from me. And I thought, man, this is just the universe lining everything up perfectly for me. And usually Terry Moss with these events, she gets like people who have never boxed before. She gets like bankers and lawyers and, white collar types, doctors and stuff to fight in these events. But this year they're getting people, they have a few of those people, but they're getting people with boxing experience and other martial arts experience to box on this card. So it's going to be competitive, fun fights. But through all this, the WBC, the World Boxing Council, heard about my story and offered to sponsor this event, and they've been awesome. Okay, they really have. The WBC has been great, and they connected me with a DEA agent, Mr. Rocky Herron from San Diego, who does lectures and presentations with the WBC, talks to kids about some of his experiences in the DEA and drug addiction prevention. He's a veteran, I think 31 years in the DEA. So he has seen it all, man. And he's in San Diego, right on the USA-Mexico border, basically like ground zero for the drugs that are entering the country, right? He was stationed in Bolivia before. He's been stationed overseas. So he's seen it all. So the WBC got me in contact with him. And so I talked to him the other day for about an hour. And we talked about the drug situation in our society, the drug culture in our society, and specifically as it relates to young people, kids, teenagers, because more and more and more um, young kids, like 8, 9, 10 years old, are using drugs. And, my brother started with weed, with alcohol, that stuff as a teenager, and for me, yeah, I always got made fun of by by friends and stuff because I just never did any of that stuff. I like, I'll drink alcohol, I drink socially, but I don't even smoke weed. I just don't do any of that stuff. And I grew up in an area where there was, crack and all that stuff all around. And now it's becoming heroin and fentanyl, the opioids. Um, but I saw the destruction that caused, and so I just always stayed away from it. But seeing my brother go through what he went through and all the struggles that me and my family went through trying to help him, man, I could write a freaking book. Anyway, so I talked to Rocky Herron for over an hour, and I just wanted to share this conversation with you guys. Again, I'll ask that you just keep an open mind and just listen. You don't have to agree with everything we're saying. Um, you probably won't, but maybe there's something in there that can help you. Maybe there's something in there you could take away from it, a different perspective. And maybe there's something in there that you can share with a family member, a friend, a coworker, a classmate that you see that's struggling, because this is a really big issue, man. Right now, we have an opioid crisis in our country that the media won't talk about. Our leadership in Washington won't talk about it. And it's personal to me because my family is part of that epidemic now because we lost my brother to it. So, anyway, guys, I hope that you enjoy this, something different. And again, if you have any questions for Rocky Herron or for myself or anything, please drop them in the comment section. All right. Thanks a lot, guys. Well, let's just start with your background. Could you talk a little bit about your work as a DEA agent, and then what led you into that work, and your experience with the WBC, how you got connected with them, and some of the programs that you've been involved in with them?
Yeah, sure. Well, I've always been interested in government service. I was born in May of '67, 5 weeks after a cousin with the same name was killed in Vietnam. And so my parents gave me the name and probably didn't really expect it to have any impact on me, but it did. And when I was growing up, I realized that I was getting a chance to live a life that my cousin didn't.
Right.
And it also kind of predisposed me, I think, to looking for a career in government service. And when I was 18, I was graduating high school in San Diego in 1985, and Kiki Camarena was kidnapped and murdered down in Mexico. And he was a San Diego guy, and it impacted me and got me thinking that maybe the DEA is a place I'd want to go. And I graduated undergraduate, and I was expected to go to law school. Everybody in my family wanted me to go to law school except for me. And so I threw an application in with the DEA, and incredibly, they hired me at 23. So I
Wow.
took the job. Yeah, I started in '90 at 23 years old. I came back to San Diego after the academy, and I thought I'd do it for 3 or 4 years, kind of get some life experience, and then maybe go back to law school. And now I'm retiring after 31 years.
Wow. 31 years of service. Well, thank you very, very much for your service. That's
You're welcome.
amazing. Um, so, okay, I'm sure you have a million experiences that you could talk about, but we could probably talk for hours about some of that stuff, both on and off the record. But how did you get into specifically into drug addiction prevention? Because I know that's something that you're very passionate about, and I'm sure a lot of what you saw on the job led to that. But how did that? How'd you find your way into working with the WBC with that initiative?
But it was completely accidental. In 2007, I worked the first 8 years of my career from 1990 to 1998 here in San Diego, and then from 1998 to 2004, I was stationed down in Bolivia and got to see the drug problem from that perspective.
Okay.
And I came home and I assumed, like I think most parents probably still do, that the schools were providing some sort of drug abuse prevention education for the kids. And I discovered in 2007 that they weren't. So I developed my own version of a drug prevention talk to give to my daughters and their friends. And just by word of mouth, I got more invitations. And I continued to be a criminal investigator. I believe very much in the work the DEA does. But over the last 14 years, more and more of my time and my passion has been spent on delivering these very strong and direct messages in schools to kids. So I kind of started it by accident.
Okay.
And at this stage in my career, I just look at the volume of drugs coming across the border from Mexico and the huge increases in overdose death and suffering here in the U.S. And I am just completely convinced that my best efforts can be spent, trying to reach the hearts and minds of young kids.
Mhm.
So I'm stepping away from DEA to just focus on that completely. And my introduction to the World Boxing Council is also accidental. In late 2019, I was down in Mexico and I was giving a presentation at the Mexican Olympic Training Center, and Mauricio Suleiman of the WBC happened to be there. And
Okay.
he saw my presentation, he saw the impact on the audience, and we spoke afterwards. And he realized that, uh, began to believe that this presentation, this message would resonate with young boxers. And he and I both agree that the huge percentage of young kids that get into boxing is because they're trying to get away from some terrible home or
Right.
neighborhood situation that's impacted by drug abuse.
Absolutely. Yeah. A lot of, it really, it kind of spans the globe. It's not just American boxing or Mexican boxing. It's a universal theme. You see that boxers a lot of times grow up in the inner city, grow up in bad neighborhoods, bad situations, and it's a way for them to kind of get away from that. I could share hundreds of stories that I've heard from different fighters from all over the world, just with their experiences with drugs, gangs, all of that. And to personalize it a little bit for me, I grew up in Detroit, and I've lived in the city pretty much my entire life, and I grew up around that thing as well. And so did my brother Anthony, my younger brother, who died last November from a fentanyl overdose.
Very sorry.
Um, it was terrible, and it was during the of course the COVID pandemic and the lockdowns and everything. And uh, I did live in LA for a decade, but my wife and I moved to Atlanta a couple years ago. And last August, some mutual friends had been around my brother in Long Beach, and that's where he was living at the time. And they saw the condition he was in, and they said, "Mike, you got to get him out of here. You got he's gonna die." And so during the middle of lockdowns, flew out there, rented a van, threw all of his crap in a van, and took him kicking and screaming, literally, because he didn't want to leave. Drove him across the country. He was detoxing. It was really bad. It was rough. Um, he had been involved in some gang stuff out there. There was actually a contract on his head at the time, so I had to get around the gang guys looking for us and get before I got out of town. But we struggled to get him in a program because budgets were cut, programs were cut. There weren't beds available at detox centers. I mean, some of them were open, but the rules were more strict, I guess, because they had so much demand at the time. And I had heard, I don't know if you have any statistics you could share, but that the addiction rates skyrocketed last year during the lockdowns, suicide rates, overdose rates. I know the opioid crisis has been really, really bad. But long story short, I drove him across the country to be with my father to help him get clean. He got cleaned up for a couple months, went back out to California, was there for a couple of weeks, and he OD'd.
Yeah, he
So
fell back in with the old crowd. Yeah.
pretty much just back into the old patterns. And he had convinced my family, because I dropped him off at my father's because I couldn't watch him 24/7. My dad could. And my father, my mother, and my sister are in the same town, and they could kind of watch him, and they got him cleaned up. And he convinced them that he was okay to go out there and back to work. So there's been a lot of tough lessons for my family dealing with this, because it's a struggle he had for his whole adult life. That's why I was so interested in speaking with you, because I know with all your experience and people you talk to, we can share this conversation and maybe help folks out there. But what could you say for? I mean, we'll talk about addiction prevention, but for families and family members dealing with what my family is dealing with, both dealing with an addict. What are some signs? What are some things that families could do to help? And then, of course, in the situation that we're in now, the grieving process. What are some things that you could recommend?
Well, there's a lot of questions packed in there.
Sorry, yeah, I that kind of
No, that's
rambled there
okay.
for a
That's
few
okay.
minutes.
One thing that stands out is you said your brother was struggling, lifelong. So I'm gonna assume that your brother had some underlying, mental health issues or
Yeah,
emotional challenges, and that your brother discovered that the party drugs could temporarily help him, and he was self-medicating. And I
yeah,
really think that's the great tragedy. And I'll bring that back to what's happened with COVID. But for me, the great tragedy is so many bright young people don't intend to end up addicted. They don't intend to end up living that life, but they believe in our BS culture that tells them the drug abuse is normal and everybody does it.
yes,
Well, some percentage of young people, like your brother, use this stuff and discover that they don't feel anxious or lonely or hate themselves or whatever, whatever their bad pain is, that the party drug, the street drug, makes it go away temporarily.
mm,
And again, I call it a tragedy because once that young person's trained their brain that there's a chemical solution, they can't untrain it. So the next time that young person is struggling with those emotions, part of their brain is saying, "Hey, I know a way right now, to feel better."
yeah,
And even if they know it's dangerous, and even if they know they shouldn't, their brain pushes them to go back to that street drug. And then, of course, the more you use it, we're all different, but eventually it's going to take control, and then you really can't stop. And then, of course, the lifestyle is so horrible, living in addiction, that they begin to hurt everybody who cares about them. So one of
absolutely.
the challenges that I've seen for so many recovered addicts, one, they have to overcome the chemical addiction, which is very, very difficult. And I also believe that I have a personal belief that once you're addicted to something, you're never not addicted. You can learn to control your consumption, but you've rewired your brain to crave that substance. So it is a lifelong issue. Um, and then there's always that pull, even when you recover, even when you think you're better, you hit that low spot and you don't have the
Yeah.
coping mechanisms. So when people come out of recovery, they've been with family, they've been in a treatment center,
Aren't
they're
they most
clean, they're eating.
vulnerable?
What's
Like in
that?
that, aren't they most vulnerable sometimes when they come
Well,
right out of
right.
recovery?
Right, sure. So
Yeah,
everybody's happy, right? You got your
mm,
brother back, right?
yeah,
He's normal, he looks good, he's happy, and you think, oh man, okay, now I can get back to my life. Dad can get back to his life. Okay, my brother's got it, right? Well, no, I mean he's just barely out of the door, and the gravitational pull of the addiction and his friends is pulling him back in. And then someone like your brother has to try to cope with all the bad behaviors that they did, and the things that ways that hurt other people while they were in addiction, the lies and the stealing and the deceptions and things. So it just becomes a really, the farther people get into it, it becomes that much harder ever to get out of it. And it's just playing out, so many times across the country. And then when you look at what happened with COVID, and the way we locked down and we isolated our kids and we took them away from positive influences in schools and their sports and their friends and the first responders, and we sent them home.
yeah.
And I personally think that every single risk factor for teen drug abuse has been exacerbated by COVID and the lockdowns. And I
Agreed.
all sorts of reporting that suicide is up, that overdose is up. I just went to a ceremony this morning. Today is International Overdose Awareness Day. And we had a ceremony
Wow.
here in San Diego, and there were 976 souls that were lost in San Diego County last year to overdose. And it was 600 and some the year before. So, somewhere close to a 50% increase in 1 year. And, I'm hearing that we're going to see a much bigger number even this year. So
Wow.
as schools begin to receive the students back in, I think we're going to be very sad when we see how much damage has been done to our kids through the lockdowns and through their exposure to our drug culture.
I hear you. Yeah, I don't have children yet. I just got married last year, but me and my wife are planning, in the coming years to have kids. And my sister has a kid, and she's having her second in December. And the lockdowns with the children and the schools, it's something we've talked about, and it just defies logic to me. I think the worst thing you could do, especially with at-risk kids, is isolate them. It just seems counterproductive to anything that would help them and benefit them.
Yeah,
But
yeah, right. I mean, I'm not an educator. I'm a DEA agent, but
right, yeah,
my hobby has been in education. I spent a lot of time with at-risk kids, and they're actually my favorite audiences because they all know exactly what I'm talking about.
right,
I go into a school of privileged kids and talking about living with addiction, and then they don't have a lot of reference to it. When I'm talking to kids in the streets or in juvenile hall, they all know what I'm talking about. And I have friends who are teachers, and they told me horror stories about the Zoom classes where the parents start cursing at the kids in the background, or the kids that aren't willing to turn, or the kids, no, really, or the kids that won't turn on the screen because they're so ashamed to have their classmates see. their
Oh, where
living
they oh, okay, I
circumstances.
got what you're saying. I gotcha.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so it's just, and then there's all this talk about equity with the kids. Well, a lot of the at-risk kids just kind of fell off the radar,
that's
um,
true.
during our COVID lockdown. So um,
They're always
that's
the
what
first
all
ones
this is
to be
driving my
forgotten
passion.
about.
What's that?
They're always the first ones to be forgotten about, right? It's funny how that works. But
Well, they're the ones who don't know there's help. They're the ones that don't know that life can be different. They're the ones living with families that may or may not even be aware that they're alive.
mhm,
There's no nurturing. There's no, at least your family, your brother had a support network that was able to get him, who cared and was able to go through all sorts of work. It took the story you told. It was a lot of effort for all of your family to get him to a place where he could recover. But most of our at-risk kids, a majority, don't have that. They don't have that family support network, so they're on their own, and they don't know what they're doing. I mean, they're in a culture. Our culture is sick, and I can talk a lot about that. But I came back from Bolivia in 2004. I'd been there for 6 years. I have three little girls, and they were 9, 7, and 5, and they lived with me in Bolivia. And none of us have been exposed much to U.S. television. Well, U.S. advertising changed in the late 90s. The pharmaceutical industry changed advertising, and I don't know if you remember
right.
those old pharmaceutical ads that had that Star Wars text on the bottom about all the side effects.
Yeah.
Well, in the late 90s, early 2000s, that all changed, and they became these very attractive, kind of compelling ads. And we'd been back for just a few months, and my little girls came up to me and said, "Daddy, what's erectile dysfunction?" And okay. So I
Yeah,
talked around that, and I
that's
said,
a
"Why are you
fun
asking me
talk.
this?" You're right. And my little girl said, "Well, we see all these ads on TV, and we don't know what it is." And I started watching, and I was shocked, because there are times of the day still where every single commercial is for some kind of a pill,
Yes.
over the counter or prescription pill that solves all your problems. And I think we're still one of the only two countries in the Western Hemisphere that allows that direct to consumer TV advertising of pharmaceuticals.
It really did
And it's
change in the 90s, huh? Especially with the opioids, with
well,
the antidepressants.
Purdue Pharma licensed OxyContin and made billions,
Yeah.
and people saw, the other pharmaceutical companies saw the potential there. And I think the pharmaceutical lobby is still the biggest lobby in Washington. So there's just insane amounts of money, and it changed our culture. And all of our kids since 2000 have been conditioned to, like the rest of us, to think that there's a chemical solution for everything. So why would we blame a 15-year-old today who's watched all the ads on TV, listened to the whole culture, every movie, every TV show, telling them that the drugs are going to solve their problems, make their life better? Why do we blame them, really, when they go to the party and some friend says, "Hey, look what I got, let's do this"?
Mhm.
Right? When there's no prevention in the schools. There's
Yeah.
no drug abuse prevention in the schools, no organized. I mean, there are places, I guess, that still have DARE. Most people think DARE doesn't work. I think DARE's better than nothing, for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
I'm not qualified to say whether DARE's great or not. What I do is not DARE. It's a little bit different, but it's something. But most of our kids across the country are getting no drug abuse prevention education, um, at all.
Yeah,
And
it sounds corny. Sorry to cut you off. I just
no,
I wanted to hit on something. There are gateway drugs. With my brother Anthony, so I should state I'm anti-drug. I just yeah, I guess I'm a nerd because Nancy Reagan's "Just Say No," that shit worked on me. Seeing that and seeing several friends die from drug overdoses and just gang fights and everything in the neighborhood around me over drugs made me not want to go and mess with that.
yeah.
But my brother in high school started smoking pot, and in his early 20s, him and I would argue about that. And I'd be called a square and all this other stuff. Um, but it really did graduate from that to other drugs. He got into the cocaine in his mid 20s, and he started to get into the other stuff. And then it was the opioids. And one thing that really pissed me off is, he had depression issues. He went to a doctor. He told me a story how he went to a doctor just explaining how he had insomnia and had the blues. He was feeling down. And he said this woman took a bottle of Zoloft like this, like a promo bottle, and just said, "Here, take this. Go away now," basically. And that's kind of where it started for him, because he started popping those. And, when you take a depressed person, hey, you're supposed to wean on and wean off of that stuff and take one a day or something. Well, when you can get a little buzz, if you take 4 or 5 of them, here it starts. And I really do think, looking back, that his addiction to opioids, because it got into opioids in his early 30s when he died, I think it started all the way back then. Who's to say, 10 years before it didn't start with that? And the fact that a doctor could just hand him a promotional bottle like that no prescription, nothing like that. And that's how it started for him. Do you hear about things like that where people go to doctors and just handing out pills like that?
Well, I'll bring it home. In 2012, I was divorcing, and the hardest thing I ever did, and breaking up my family, and my whole self image was this super dad.
Mm,
And I chose to leave my family, and I've stayed engaged with the girls and everything, but it was a brutal evolution. I wasn't sleeping for weeks. I just didn't sleep, and my health was deteriorating. So I went to a family doctor, and I told him about as a DEA agent, and one of my jobs was investigating doctors who were recklessly prescribing. We had this whole conversation, and then I explained my anxiety and depression. And the first thing he says, "Well, what do you want?" And he offered me a list of popular antidepressants. And I'm looking at him thinking, man, well, what about like nutrition and yoga and
exercise. Yeah.
counseling, exercise? Nope. Here, what do you want? So okay. So I accepted one of the antidepressants, and it was supposed to, they tell you it takes a week or something to titrate up and to get used to it. So I was taking them, and I talked to another DEA agent friend of mine, and he goes, "What the hell's wrong with you?" I was on the phone, and my speech was slurring, and he's the one that convinced me that I was having a bad reaction. And I realized that just on that one drug, I'm anti-medicine as well. And I was just on this one drug, and I was having a bad reaction to it. And I decided I'd rather be depressed than on this stuff. But
Right.
no, I have a lot of experience with doctors just prescribing the stuff, and with no counseling, giving young high school football players OxyContin with a broken
Yes.
leg, and not having any counseling for that child or the parent that this is extremely addictive, and you have to be very cautious. First signs of wanting more, come see me. We'll get you help. We just threw this out there, and we're reckless. And we're a reckless society. I mean, we could talk about marijuana legalization here in a moment, but we didn't legalize a little bit of marijuana. We didn't legalize 5% potent plant. We just said it's all legal. There you go. And
Yeah.
now we got people selling our kids 90%, potent
The
concentrates.
super strong stuff.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So for the last 20 years, we have really gone in a terrible direction as a society. Again, telling our kids there's chemicals that are going to improve your life in spite of all the evidence and all the carnage and all the stories like yours and so many others and all the overdose numbers, and the evidence is abundant that this is
Mhm.
causing us enormous harm. But we're not having, in my opinion, not having a good national conversation about, hey, maybe we can change directions, or maybe we should think about something different. So
Yeah, it seems like the leadership in Washington, with both parties, but particularly this current administration, not to get overly political, but they're not talking about this at all. And another personal story that just popped in my head: when I was in the Marine Corps, I had a couple of wisdom teeth pulled, and they handed me a bottle like this of Vicodin, a massive. I'm a 19-year-old kid. I took two or three of them for a day or so, and I felt fine. I threw the bottle out because I said I don't want to mess with this. It's just Vicodin, right, quote unquote. But I didn't even want to go there. I don't like taking medicine if I don't have to. I like to do things the natural way. The way I look at it, we were primates going back millions of years that got by on natural food and things like that. And it's only until very, very recently where we've really begun to over medicate ourselves. But so I think we're in agreement on that, philosophically. But our government's not going to change anything. The system's not going to change. The media is not going to change. They're not even really addressing these issues. So what can families do? What can the individual do to
well,
prevent what happened to my brother?
that's my whole passion. That's my whole reason for doing what I'm doing, is getting to the kids. I'll talk to any community group that'll invite me. But my preferred audience are the kids in the schools, because I have them as hostage audience. They have to sit there and listen to me. Many
Right.
of them do not. I will say most of I've talked to 130,000 kids now in 15 different countries. I've gone very challenging places with my presentation, and I've had extremely hostile audiences of kids. And the majority at the beginning aren't interested in me. They look at me and think, "What's that old bald guy going to teach me? He's got nothing to teach me."
Yeah.
And generally, by the end of my presentations, they're with me.
Hmm.
They get it. That I tell them it's your choice. You're surrounded in a culture that's telling you to make this bad choice. But let me share with you what happened to all these other people, just as smart and beautiful and brilliant as you are, who went down that road. And for years, I wouldn't go do parent presentations, because the only, high school would invite 1,000 parents and 10 would show up. And those 10 who'd show up are the ones, I didn't need to reach. Unfortunately, like I started in DEA in 1990. We were losing 10,000 Americans a year to overdose death in 1990, and that seemed like a big number to me. And when you're a DEA agent, you don't really deal a lot with people in addiction. I mean, we're chasing the higher level drug traffickers, and
Right,
we
right.
don't work with drug addicts. I mean, you're not going to be a member of a major drug organization if you're a drug user because you're unreliable. They can't trust you either, right? But I spent about 10 years of my career investigating bad doctors and pharmacists, and they were the ones getting their patients addicted. So I ended up kind of getting deep into the world of addicted patients, people like your brother, and learning their challenges and learning their issues and understanding a lot of life living in addiction that most DEA agents don't really get exposed to. And so my presentations are all about the reality that so many of these kids are living. And so I'll talk to parents and I try to scare them. I've had people tell me that my presentation's too strong, that I might trigger, some kids in the school. And my response is, well, if I haven't triggered everybody in the audience, that I failed,
Yeah.
because the numbers, and we can talk about that, but the suffering is unbelievable. So it was 10,000 people dying in 1990. In 2007, when I started doing this work in the schools, it had climbed to 35,000. And that shocked me. Then 2007, 35,000. I was shocked and very naive, very patriotic guy. Hey, and I thought, wow, our country we
I'll
can't accept
stand
that.
for this. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but no, we're going to have this. Obviously, the powers that be are going to start to have different conversations. Well, it's 14 years later. The number last year was 93,000 dead, men, women, and children. And as you pointed out, there is no big national conversation about prevention. And I don't know how that can be. I think we have this bizarre notion that, well, maybe because DARE didn't work, that nothing would work. I don't agree with that. And I think,
But maybe
we
it
have
did
to try.
work because the numbers were less. Again, I'll
Well,
go back to Nancy Reagan, just say no. And I get it. There's going to be people that watch this that are going to pound their screen and say, shut up. It worked for me. And the numbers were less back then. So maybe there was something to it.
well, look, I can't speak to whether DARE worked or not. I
Right.
can say this, and this is my marketing argument, because people challenge me on what I'm doing. How can I prove that it does any good? And my big marketing slogan, Mike, you might want to use this in the future. It's better than nothing,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
What I'm doing is
Exactly.
better than nothing. If I were trying to come into your school to replace some pre-existing program that you had to educate kids, and you said, well, why are you better? Then I would be, okay, I better figure that out. I'm going into schools that have nothing. And I don't know that DARE was up to the challenge at the time. I'll also point out that our drug culture has gotten much worse. So DARE
Mm.
was designed at a set point in time with a drug culture that's just gotten more and more dangerous. Drugs are more potent, more available, less expensive, and more culturally acceptable.
Yeah.
But again, I don't understand. We're the richest country in the history of the world, most information of any country in the history of the world, and yet we're allowing this suffering. And then when I say the figure of 93,000 overdose deaths, I'm actually arguing that the number of people suffering near death is probably 500,000. That's
Yeah.
throwing that number out there. I have no idea,
No, it has
but
to be.
huge numbers of people who would previously have died from overdoses are being saved by the drug narcan, which will reverse the
Yes.
impact of an overdose. So opioid overdose. So thank God for narcan. But I'm saying, but if you look at the numbers of people suffering what would have been fatal overdoses, I think it's actually much bigger and much scarier than even the 93,000. That's the official number.
Yeah, and for every death, every one of those individuals, well, not every one of them, but many of them are having close to death experiences. I know my brother, there was multiple times over years where he wound up in the emergency room. There were situations where he'd go on a bender for a weekend or whatever it was, and he wouldn't drink water to where his brain was dehydrated and he'd have a seizure and wind up in the emergency room from that. So it wasn't necessarily an overdose, but it was a reaction to the drug use, right? So there are things like that folks go through all the time, and they have all these close calls, and then there's that one time where they just don't calculate the dose the correct way. I truly think, I mean, I'll never know, but I think for my brother, because he had been cleaned up for a couple months, he probably just overdid it and tried to use the same amount he had been using before in his tolerance.
That's the classic. Historically, that was the classic overdose scenario.
Okay.
That someone who was a heavy heroin user would get clean and come out, and for whatever reason would decide to relapse, and was drinking or smoking weed or whatever, and didn't consider the fact that their tolerance is down to you're at my level. They have zero tolerance,
Right.
and so they would take the same number of oxys or the same amount of heroin, and it would overdose them. It's different today, and we need to talk about fentanyl and methamphetamine. But fentanyl is a synthetic opioid like OxyContin. It's just maybe 50 times more potent. and it's very inexpensive. It's been easily obtained from China through the internet, through the dark web. And the drug traffickers they began 5, 6 years ago to replace heroin with fentanyl.
Yes.
And there are areas of the country where every heroin sample on the street that law enforcement acquires actually is fentanyl. And so now what we have, and this could have been what happened to your brother could have gotten a dose of fentanyl or a fake pill, a counterfeit pill that he thought was safe, looked like a Xanax, looked like a Vicodin, looked like a Oxycontin. It just had too much fentanyl in it and would have killed anybody who took it. So we have those two scenarios. So we have the hardcore drug users, like your brother, right? Longtime users who are suffering because of the super potent fentanyl that's available. And then we have what are called naive users. And those are people who don't have any experience with the drug. And many of them are dying the first time they use it. They take that what looks like a Xanax. They take what looks like an Oxycontin. It looks exactly. I mean, the quality now from these counterfeits is scary. Um, and they pop it and it's done. And they just go to sleep. It's not my experience around it is that an opioid overdose is not a dramatic thing. The people just they stop breathing and many often just die where they sit or they die where they lay because the opioids just slow down their breathing so much.
Yeah, they can feel their breathing slowing down, correct?
Yeah.
Because my brother had a journal and he wrote in it. I don't remember the exact wording, but he wrote that night that, I think I've overdone it this time. I feel like I'm going. And instead of calling the ambulance or something, he just kind of let himself go. So it was maybe a mixture of an overdose, an accidental overdose slash almost suicide, because he didn't call the authorities to try to help him because he was able to write that down. The writing was bad, but he was able to write that down. So they did find pills on him though. So I wonder if your scenario that you brought up may have happened because maybe he did take pills. And
Well,
that's
I don't see. I've never used heroin.
yeah, yeah,
I can't tell you. I can just talking to people, but I think part of the desired effect is that you relax and you fall
yes.
asleep. So I think I don't know that anybody who uses it can really have any kind of a notion that they're overdosing.
Mm.
Um, because I think you drift to sleep. And so I've seen pictures of people who've died. They were reaching for the narcan, a very sad picture. So there must be some point maybe where an experienced user realizes they've gone too far. But what happens at the parties, and this is why the pills are so dangerous. If I'm manufacturing pills for a pharmaceutical company, legitimately, I'm a scientist, I'm regulated, I know what I'm doing. I take the sugars and I take the drug and I mix it together to make my pill and I compress it. And each of the pills that I make has the proper dose because I know how to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But if you and I, Mike, decide to become drug traffickers today, and we look where all the money is, and all the money is in making the fake pills, so we figure out how to buy a pill press from China. We buy fentanyl from China, and in our garage, we start to crank out these pills. Well, we don't know how to blend this stuff. We don't know how to
Right.
blend the fentanyl. We don't know how to mix it in. So as hard as we try, as hard as you and I might try, some of those pills are going to have very little of the drug. Some will have a range, and some will have enough to kill anybody that takes it. And they all look exactly the same.
Right.
And there is no, once the pill comes out of the pill press, there's no way to test it. And the
Yeah.
people who manufacture these things don't test them. They just sell them. And then they get sold and they get sold and they're sold 10 times before they show up at the party where someone you and I care about, some young kid, listens to a friend and says, hey, take this. And it'll be cool. And
Right.
I've met very cynical, get this, I've met very cynical teenagers in San Diego, 16, 17-year-olds, who, when I talk about this scenario of the deadly pill, they tell me, oh, yeah, we know about that. So when we go to a party, we watch what happened to other people first. Think
Ugh.
about how cynical that is in teenagers, right? And
Yeah.
I have to school them. I have to school them because that logic doesn't fly. Because they may have seen their friends using, the pills that are low dose. That
Right.
doesn't mean that they won't reach in, or their little brother won't reach in, or their girlfriend won't reach in and take that one that would kill anybody who took it.
Right. It's just the luck of the draw.
It's the luck of the draw. And then in fentanyl, and we're doing a lot of effort to get Narcan out in the communities. We're trying to get it in schools. Parents can get it at pharmacies. And if you have someone like your brother who's living in addiction and you have access to them, Narcan's a good thing to have around. Fentanyl is so powerful, it can take multiple Narcan doses. You may just not have enough Narcan
To
to
offset it.
counteract that powerful fentanyl overdose. So the whole thing is just scary. And then, I'll jump quickly to methamphetamine. San Diego is kind of ground zero for meth back in the 80s. The Hells Angels
Yeah.
were making it. It was this dirty, low purity, ugly drug full of all sorts of toxins. And you call them tweakers, and the people would show obvious signs, their teeth were damaged, their skin was damaged. Well, I've been working the border with Mexico the last few years, and there is a tidal wave of methamphetamine coming out of Mexico, and it's 99% pure, and the price has dropped 90%. A pound of meth used to be $15,000 in San Diego. Now it's $1,500. And that pure, super pure meth is now getting to the street level. And so for more than 30 years, meth has been the number one killer in San Diego. And it doesn't kill the same way. It doesn't kill by putting you to sleep. It just causes little strokes and little heart attacks that eventually take their toll on the user. So the two big factors driving overdose, I think, in San Diego and I think nationwide are the fentanyl and then the chronic meth use.
How do you talk to a kid? Or I'll personalize this, a family member. I had so many conversations with my brother. He worked in the medical field. Okay. So he was very educated on this stuff, very educated. And he would say, I know how to mix all this. I know he had tried meth. When he moved to California, it might have been the worst thing for him because the drug scene out there is the worst in the country. The fentanyl is really bad. The heroin, even the weed is a lot stronger in Cali, right? He tried meth for the first time out there. He really got heavy into it. But he would tell me, I know how to mix this stuff. I know how to track it. The typical idiot kid at the party doesn't know what they're doing, but I know what I'm doing. And he would say, I need my medicine so I can cope and I could deal with this breakup with this girlfriend or whatever he was going through. And it was always something, right? There's always something going on that's a tragedy that he needs to get high because of it. And I would try to explain just what you just said, that how do you know you're not getting a hot dose? How do you know you're not getting something off the street that wasn't mixed correctly, et cetera, et cetera? And we get into these arguments. Is there anything, I don't know, when we were giving your presentations, you talked about the kids in the beginning being all against you. And then by the end of it, you've got them. Is there a moment where you see things click? Is there a particular thing that you say, okay, let's hear that?
Yeah, no. So I started my presentation for elementary school kids. The first time I walked into my daughter's fifth grade class with my badge and my gun and my bulletproof shield, very easy to have the kids like you, right?
Yeah.
I was cool dad that day. But then I asked the kids when I was done with my little talk about my job, I said, hey, anybody have questions about drugs? And yeah, what's methamphetamine? What's heroin? And my heart sank. I didn't want my daughter and her fifth grade classmates asking me about meth and heroin. So that's when I asked around, hey, are you doing any kind of prevention in the schools? And they aren't. They weren't, and they still aren't. So I did my own presentation, and the elementary school kids loved it, right? I made it at their level. They all understand. I mean, they're all watching TV. They're not stupid. I don't care how. This is something that the parents need to understand. Your family's not safe. And I'll tell some stories about my kids. Your family's not safe. If you have kids in this culture, you're not safe, period. Mm-hmm. If you believe you are, you're naive, you're mistaken, and you're doing your kids a disservice. So, but in my early years, the first couple of years was just elementary school. And I wasn't a natural speaker. People can't believe that because I won't shut up now. But at the time, I was not a natural public speaker. And I thought, wow, what happens when somebody asks me to go to a high school? And I kind of said in my head, I said, well, I'm going to say yes. So I agreed to take a high school presentation, and I got killed. Those kids shelled me because I took my elementary school presentation into this really kind of a rough high school. So I went back and I hardened it, and I added some, I call them my Rambo pictures. I have some pictures of my time patrolling the jungle in Bolivia. And I needed to show the kids, hey, I've done things that you haven't. You look at me and you think, hey, this guy doesn't do it. I've done some stuff that you haven't done. I've seen things that you haven't seen, right?
Some stuff.
Yeah, I've seen some stuff. And then a mom whose son is a quadriplegic from an overdose. She and I and her son worked together for years in San Diego. And she gave me a video that she put together of pictures of local kids who died of overdoses and set to a country song, If I Die Young. And it was a very powerful video. And then about 2 years ago, I upgraded that to Lincoln Park's on One More Light. And I age regress. So I've got a series of overdose pictures starting with Ike Turner. And then as the song goes on, the age get younger and younger and younger and younger and younger, down into the teens, down into the single digits. And the youngest overdose is 11 days old, who died on mother's milk from methamphetamine. So that's about 10 or 15 minutes into my presentation. So after I talk about myself a little bit and I get the kids to realize maybe I do have some interesting things to say, I show that video. And I don't care how hard you are. If you're not completely sociopathic, you're touched by that one because you're seeing really little kids, that are wiped out. And I generally find that if I don't have the kids with me by that point in my presentation, when that song stops playing, they're tracking. And again, because the most resistant kids The ones who are most resisting my message are the ones who most need to hear it and the ones who suffered the most from those toxic environments.
So hit them with, they need to see imagery.
Oh yeah,
They need to
kids
see
today, like my
examples.
daughters are 26, 23, and 21, and half of what I do in my presentations, I argue I learned from being a DEA agent for 3 decades. The other half I've learned from trying to raise daughters in this
Yeah.
crazy society. I blame them for me having no hair. It's hard, it's stressful, and yeah, if we're not reaching the kids emotionally, I mean, I'll ask the kids at the end of my talks. I try to bring them back up, and at the end of my talks, I'll say, "How many of you guys respect yourselves? Raise your hands." And everybody raises their hand. Well, that's easy in an assembly to say you
Mhm.
respect yourself. But what happens this weekend at the party? When you're there, lights are low, you're trying to fit in, you're trying to be cool, and someone you look up to puts this drug in front of you and says, "Hey, let's do this. Come on." Because that's when you need to respect yourself. Easy to
Mhm.
tell me that in an assembly, but will you respect yourself at that moment? So I hit the kids hard and emotionally, hoping that some of that sticks and that they don't want to end up like those, the sad stories that I share with them. And I've had tons of kids come up to me after my presentation. I've talked to 130,000. And I've had a bunch of kids come up to me after my presentations, thanking me and saying, "Wow, you're the first guy that made me actually understand why not to use drugs." I've been told many times not to use. Every kid's been told by somebody not to use it. Kids tell me that I'm the first guy that made them really understand,
Why they shouldn't.
why. Now, do I reach
That's
every kid?
interesting.
I also believe out of every 100 kids I reach, every 100 kids I talk to, 10% are like you and me. We're goody two shoes. We have a plan for life. We're just never going to use anything, right? 10% are knuckleheads, maybe like
Mhm.
your brother. They're not going to listen to anybody.
Mhm.
So my battle in my mind is for the 80% in the middle, the ones that are on the fence. And
Okay.
those are the ones I'm trying to reach and to get them information that's in their brains before they need to use it, right? I want them
Okay.
prepared before they go to the party and that person they admire um, offers them a terrible choice.
Yeah, from your experience, this issue, it's something that you got to reach with a family member, a child early, right? Because, as you said before, once they're addicted and once they've been doing it for years and years, it seems like it's nearly impossible. It's not completely impossible, but nearly impossible to beat it. Because with my brother, he died. He was in his late 30s when he died, and he had been using. I mean, he started with pot and stuff like that, but he had been using for half his life, and the hard stuff, cocaine and up, probably 15 years of his life. At that point, he had just patterns in his brain. He needed professional help. He needed doctors and people like that. He needed to be willing to do the work, which it's a tremendous amount of work. And at that point, it was almost impossible to get through to him, you know?
Well, I know. I mean, Mike, there's so many things that are going on, right? I was taught years ago that young people stop developing emotionally when they start substance abusing, right? Whether it's alcohol or weed or harder stuff. That if you're 16 and you become a substance abuser, like a hard substance abuser, that you stop developing emotionally. And
Hmm.
I've come to believe that. So 10 years go by, and your brother, you force him to get help, or something happens and he wants to get help. Well, now he's a 25-year-old with a 15-year-old, emotional stability.
Hmm.
And now he's got 15 or 10 years of no education, no professional development, no life skills. He's alienated all the good people in his life. And his circle of friends are all people that are probably still doing it.
Yeah.
And on top of that, the chemical rewiring of the brain, which is always telling them, hey, when your life sucks, come back to me. When your life
Right.
sucks, come back to me. And no, it's so challenging. And I really am not, I have no expertise in treatment. I agree with you that it's fails far more often than it succeeds. There are good people trying to do it. There are unfortunately a lot of mercenary people trying to just get money who really aren't providing much treatment at all. And the treatment industry itself's got a lot of conflict within it.
That's a
So
good point.
my passion's all about getting to kids, before they've made those terrible choices, getting to kids before they've trained their brains. Um, and I tell the kids drug work. In my presentation, I say, look, drugs work. If you want to get up, it'll take you up. If you want to get down, it'll take you down. It's not an accident that people spend billions of dollars a year for this stuff. What you need to think about is what's waiting for you the next morning,
Right.
right? What's waiting for you when you wake up? And if you respect your life and you want to respect your dreams and you want to accomplish your goals, you need to be thinking about what comes after the party, because your whole society has been told you just party and there's no consequence. Well, that's not true. It's not true. And yet very few people are out there like me. I'm not alone. I mean, people, we're trying, but really not enough of us are out there. We're not getting enough access to the kids to share it with them.
Yeah, when you have so much messaging, I mean, with any program on TV, uh, just about any pop song, all of it, the messaging is drugs, 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 drink, 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 sex, sex, just nonstop. When you're the one person with a message that's contrary to that, you're probably going to get a lot of resistance, I would imagine.
Oh, I'm hated. No, it's funny.
Yeah,
I don't know how many of you know Mr. Mackey from South Park, but I show a little clip of Mr. Mackey. Drugs are bad. If you do drugs, you're bad. And of course, I look, unfortunately, quite a lot like Mr. Mackey.
yeah, you do.
So I make a joke about it. Oh,
That's
thanks, Mike.
I'm
You didn't have to do it.
sorry. I can
But
see it. I
no,
can
but I
see
show
it.
that little clip, and then to break the ice, and the kid, I say, yeah, I look like Mr. Mackey. The kids all laugh because I look a lot like Mr. Mackey. But I say that's not what I'm going to do because that's a joke. What he does on the show, it's on South Park because it's a joke. But unfortunately, a lot of people are still doing it. That's not where we're going. This is about you. My program's called I Choose, right? I choose my future. And I said, look, I want you to be successful. I'm here today because I want you to be successful. Doesn't matter what I want. It matters what you want. Are you smart enough to respect yourself and resist those temptations? Now, I've had the incredible opportunity to speak about 15 times inside San Diego's juvenile halls. And there are minimum security juvenile halls, and then there's a juvenile prison in cell blocks in San Diego, which kind of horrified me when I went in. There's 16-year-old kids living in cell blocks, all because they've committed violent crimes, and that's where society's put them. And how much love do you think I experienced from those kids when I show up at
I
their
can
break
only
room
imagine.
and they figure out
Yeah.
who I am, right? And one anecdote. Early last year, I got an email from a probation officer at 2 a.m, and she said, "Rocky, I don't know what to do. I'm working overnight guard shift. This is the worst group of young men we've ever had." Think about that. This is the juvenile prison in San Diego, and this guard says this is the worst group of young men we've ever had. And she goes, "Your message would be so important for them, but I can't even really ask you to come in here because they're just terrible." And she really was just venting. So I got the email when I woke up the next morning, and I wrote back, "Put me in, coach." And a week later, I went in on a Saturday to talk to those kids, and they were, in fact, the worst group of young men I've ever met. I've spoken to
Wow.
gang kids in El Salvador who treated me better than these group of young men in San Diego. They were
Wow.
cursing at me. You can't curse in juvenile hall. I look at the guards, and the guards are like, "Hey, dude, you volunteer for this. You're on your own." It was amazing,
Wow.
and I wanted to quit. I wanted to quit many times. They didn't care about the video. They didn't care about any of it. But I kept going. But inside, I thought, well, I'll just quit. And I'm not a quitter. But towards the end, I'd had enough. This one young kid just wouldn't shut up. So I went over to him, and he goes, "Get the F out of here." Then again, I look at the guard, and the guard's like, and I smiled at the kid and said, "No, you're disrespecting yourself. You're disrespecting me. That's not what it's about." So he kept ramping it up. And he got more and more vile, more and more insulting. And I was fighting my reaction. And finally, he said something really ugly. And I said, "No, dude, I can't do that for you. I'm sorry. Um, I'm not going away until you respect me." And he put his head down. I won. So I went back and I spent 15 more minutes finishing. And then at the juvenile hall, I go up to each young man with an extremely submissive handshake. I put my hand literally flat and look them in the eye, and I grab their hand and say, "Hey, thank you for listening." And then I said, "Hey, if you believe in what I'm doing, if you believe in this message, will you stand with your backs to the camera in a picture for me?" And I have a picture of this group, and the kid who was most insulting is standing front and center with his hands behind his back, to show respect for the message. And I realized something, and really, because I thought a lot about that day, and I realized that for a lot of these kids, just not quitting.
Yeah.
All you have to do to win with them is just not quit. He expected that kid, every other kid, and every guard in that place fully expected me to lose my top and quit. And I almost did, but I didn't. And that was the win, right?
Okay.
And so when I talk to those kids, these kids in prison, and I ask them, and when we're friends at the end, "What age did you start using drugs?" And what do you think they tell me, Mike? Every time.
13.
8, 9, 10.
Shit.
8, 9, 10. Every single group of young men in juvenile hall, somebody at 8 or 9 or 10, some older brother, mom's boyfriend, mom, who knows, somebody was putting a drug in front of them,
Man.
right? And so those little kids who want to fit in discovered that they do fit in with the older people through substance abuse, right? And so it's really insidious and ugly. And as I mentioned, we're barely giving any prevention education to our kids. And generally, if we do, it starts in middle or high school, years after our kids are in these scenarios where somebody is offering them what today is potentially a deadly drug.
Man. I didn't think about it that way because you're right. most high schools will talk about this kind of stuff. It's almost like sex education. You know, when you're talking to a kid who's 17, they're like, "Well, yeah, no shit. Like, yeah, I know what this is." So you have to start really at the elementary school level, huh? Like you have to
I
talk to
that's
them
no,
really
I,
young.
I believe that's where we need to start. Obviously, it's not
Okay.
quite the same message. You have to be a little
Right, right, right.
no, but I mean, there are occasionally schools that will have me come in, but
Mm,
it's still they're worried about parents getting upset, and so I've been, for a lot of years I've been doing the same thing for 14 years now. And 10 years ago, a lot of people thought I was too strong, too harsh. The kids would get upset, parents would get upset. Well, I haven't changed, but my message is now seen as a lot more mainstream because our social reality has shifted, and
yeah,
now nobody can ignore the terrible situation that I've been preaching and many others have been preaching, that we were going to be at. I mean, death is coming for our kids and it's going to keep coming. And the unscrupulous drug traffickers don't care. They're making huge money selling these fentanyl pills. And they're going to keep doing it. And they don't care that your child dies. They don't care that your teenager discovers that fentanyl, you know, temporarily solves their anxiety or depression or self-esteem issues or whatever. And then our culture, continues to endorse it. You can't find a TV show or a movie produced for kids that does not have a pro-drug message in it.
mm,
I challenge you. I challenge anybody in your audience. If they know a show or a movie that doesn't make laughing, joking references to drug abuse, I'd like to see it.
mm.
It's just part of our culture, and there's so much suffering and so much death. And for the 93,000 people that died, as you mentioned, there are probably 10 or 20 more who suffer on an addiction having non-fatal overdoses,
Yes,
right? So that's several million people. I don't know what the exact numbers estimates are, but millions of people, suffering in addiction, hard drug addiction. And for every one of those people, there's a family environment and a
yes.
community that's impacted. And so that's tens of millions of people living on pins and needles and anxiety like your entire family was with your brother. And I can't think of another social problem that cuts across every single geographic, socioeconomic, and racial boundaries. No family
Exactly.
is safe. No community is safe from this. And yet, none of our national politicians, none of our national leaders have picked up the battle flag and said, "Look, I'm calling a national conversation. What can we do?"
Why are they not fighting? Is it just because the drug lobby is so embedded in both parties, really, in DC? And I feel like the politicians are in bed with these pharmaceutical companies, and that has to be part of it, right? It has to be the money involved.
Well, no, I mean, like I said, I think the pharmaceutical industry is still the biggest lobby in Washington.
Yeah.
I wish we didn't have ads for pills on TV, but if I'm right and they are the biggest lobby, then we're always going to have ads on TV, right? I mean, there's not
Yes.
going to be any law to change that. Um, I'm actually very upset with the marijuana industry, not because marijuana has been legalized in places. I drink whiskey once in a while. I mean, that's my drug. If an adult wants to use weed, that's an adult choice. But science is proving over and over and over again that teenage marijuana use is damaging teenage brain development, and there's strong connections to mental illness. And we don't know if the weed use causes mental illness or if the mental illness is, causing the weed use. But anyway, it's super connected. Every
They go
single
hand in
study is
hand.
documenting this. So what
Yeah.
I'm upset about the marijuana industry, if they're all about legitimate marijuana use, they're the ones, in my opinion, that should be supporting me the most.
Mm.
They're the ones that should be getting me access to the schools. They're the ones that should be funding people like me to tell kids, don't use it until you're 21. Your brain's still developing. It's a very powerful psychoactive drug, particularly when you're smoking the concentrates, which are, 80,
Yes.
90%. Even the leaf in California is 25, 30%, right? And a lot of adults don't understand that. A joint when I was growing up was 5%.
Right.
Bob Marley smoked 5%, got plenty
Right.
stoned off it, right? But
Right.
now you can't even I don't think you can get under 20% in California in the
What about the
leaf.
gummies and all that kind of stuff?
You
That's
don't know what's in those things, right? Super concentrated. And why would somebody make concentrated marijuana look like gummies? It's for kids. And that's
mm,
causing all sorts of problems because a lot of people don't understand. If you smoke marijuana, it gets into your bloodstream very quickly through your lungs and it gets into your brain. You feel an effect fairly quickly, right? I've never smoked it, but I understand that's the mechanism. But if you eat it in a gummy or a cookie or whatever, it has to get metabolized through your liver, which can take an hour. So a lot of these young kids, get these gummies. They're all excited because they want to try it because everyone's told them it's cool their whole life. And someone will give the kid a gummy and say, "Don't eat the whole thing; it's pretty strong." So the kid will listen and nibble off a leg. And they're with their friends and they're all excited to start feeling high, and nothing happens. So
mhm.
they nibble off another leg and they're bored and nothing's happened. So they eat the whole gummy. Well, now they've got 4, 5, 6, 10 joints worth of weed, in their system. And when it comes online, they don't do well. It's not a fatal overdose, but emergency department reportings across the country, all sorts of young kids are having, severe behavioral challenges and mental health breakdowns from popping these super strong concentrates.
Hmm.
So again, I don't understand why even the marijuana industry can't pony up and say, look, we believe in it for adults, but we're going to support, making sure the kids don't hurt themselves on it. And then, of course, when I'm talking to the kids, and I have the lovely job of trying to convince kids in California, for example, that marijuana is dangerous, right?
Good luck
When
with
the huge
that.
percentage of them have already used it, they like it,
Yeah.
their parents use it. I was at one high school in San Diego, a continuation high school, and some years ago, and I was talking, and I got challenged by some kid. I call him Spicolis, from Fast Times at Ridgemont
Yeah.
High. So the kid challenges me, Spicoli. He wants to embarrass me in front of his classmates. And he goes, well, Rocky, what did you think when you smoked marijuana? And I'm in front of 200 kids in a continuation high school. And I said, well, I've never smoked it. And they all started laughing. The whole group just burst out laughing.
Wow.
And I had to think about that. I'm like, wow, that is such an outrageous statement to them that an adult would say he's never smoked weed. They just didn't believe me. Because I think, like in their minds, everybody they know
Has done
either
it.
uses or has used weed.
I used to have
So it's
conversations with my brother, like, because he would say, man, 90% of people have smoked weed. Most people have done coke. And he really believed that. I don't know what the statistics are, but my wife's never done it. And I know several family members and friends who haven't. Most people probably have smoked a joint. We probably are in the minority on that. But I think that there's a lot of misinformation because of the role media plays in this, the drug culture all over television, where I think a lot of people think everyone's doing this stuff, and that's not necessarily the case.
no, no, it's absolutely not the case, and it's not. There's still a majority of kids, based on the surveys, there's still a majority of kids who aren't doing it. Now,
Yeah.
I think it probably is the majority who tries it.
Right.
I think it probably is a big majority of kids who try it at some point just to say they did it or find out what it's about. But the number of kids who continue to use it is a minority of the kids. But the culture certainly makes it seem like everybody's doing it, and it certainly empowers those kids who want to rationalize and tell themselves,
What
"Oh,
they're
I'm
doing.
just doing what everybody else does." And
Okay.
I've had some middle schools tell me that my 1 hour presentation, changed their school culture, and that
Hmm.
was a nice compliment to me. But I had to really think about how can that possibly be? 1,500 middle school kids. How can my 1 hour presentation change anything? And where we came down on it is that by educating the entire student body the truth of drug abuse, right? To really what it does to people at all these different, how it hurts babies, it hurts young adults, it hurts families, it hurts our communities. That what we think might be happening is we might be empowering that normally silent majority of kids who stay silent when the druggy kids are pushing their BS on the campus to kind of speak up and say, no, we're not
Hmm.
cool with that. And maybe I dare to hope that my presentation kind of pushes that drug culture back off the school campus. And if that's all my work does, if that's all I can accomplish is get schools to be a little more drug free during school hours and a little more able to teach our kids, then I'll take the win,
I
right?
hear you, man.
That's a win for me. But I don't have the ability to track kids. I don't do long-term surveys, anything like that. I just have anecdotally a lot of kids coming up and telling me, man, wow, you educated me. I didn't know what I was doing. And so that's why I keep doing it. More and more schools in San Diego are calling me. They're having me come in. They've seen how I engage the kids. And until we find better, longer term education solutions, I continue to argue that my program's, much better than nothing. Right.
There you
But
go.
I want to tell you, the parents, any parents who are listening about what happened to me. So um, my oldest is now a police officer up in Idaho. And when she was in college, she got an FBI honors internship. And that's a really hard thing to get when you're in college. It opens the door to a career as an FBI agent. And I was so proud of her. I was living vicariously. And as part of that, she had to get a lie detector test. And she went in and they take 3 or 4 hours. And she called me after an hour. So just when she called me, I knew something was bad.
Hmm.
And she was sobbing on the phone. She said, Dad, I failed my test. Why? Because I smoked weed in high school. I couldn't believe it, right? Because
Oh
I'm
man.
Mr. Anti-Drug. I've been talking to my
Right.
kids forever. Like, what do you mean? And it was her boyfriend. And she
Oh
said, Dad, it
shit.
was everywhere. And it was her boyfriend that just kept pushing her and kept pushing her. And she smoked weed, a handful of times her last semester of high school. Now, it wasn't that you can't go in the FBI if you've ever smoked weed. It was too close in time. It hadn't enough years hadn't passed. So she lost this amazing opportunity. My youngest daughter, when she was 16 or 17, um, she was living with her mother, and her mother called me upset because she found an empty bottle of medical marijuana. This is 5, 6 years ago in her room. So I left work and went over there, and we got in a big argument with my kid. And I accused my daughter at 17 of using dope. And she looks at me and goes, Dad, I don't use drugs anymore. Yeah, exactly. And I said,
Wow.
what do you mean by that? She goes, well, when I was 11, I used. And it turns out she had a best friend when she was 11. And I knew the family. The mom's a law professor. The dad's a real estate investor, beautiful home. And my younger girl would spend the weekends there to get away from her mean older sisters. I couldn't stop the bullying, best I tried. What I didn't know, that family had a 17-year-old son who liked to smoke weed. And those parents decided, like many do, that they would rather have the kids smoking weed at home with them than having them out doing it in public. I don't agree with that decision, but a lot of families make that choice.
Yeah.
So they acquired weed for the kid and allowed him to smoke it at home.
Wow.
But what do you think the message was to his little kid sister at 11?
Yeah.
Good to go for me too, right?
Yeah.
So every weekend, unbeknownst to me, and nobody told me this, every weekend the little girl would steal weed from her older brother and get stoned with my daughter all weekend. And I'd pick her up on Sunday nights, and she'd be red-eyed and tired, and I assumed it was just from not sleeping. My daughter's too smart, I'm trying too hard. But I asked her at 17, I said, well, why did you stop? And she goes, Dad, I was in seventh grade, and I've been smoking about a year, and I didn't like who I was becoming. I didn't like what marijuana was doing to me. So God bless her, my daughter at 12 could see what marijuana was doing to her, and she quit. Her
Wow.
best friend, the one who got her into it, had her family had big college plans for her. The mom's a recruiter at a major university, and that daughter had plans. She got pregnant at 16, dropped out of school, adopted the whole marijuana culture, and now she's a lovely single mom at 21.
Wow.
Certainly not following that life plan, right?
Right. Right.
So, you know, if it can hit my family, it can hit yours. It can hit anybody's. It's just out there. And I was trying hard to educate my kids, and they still went the wrong way on me. Luckily, nothing serious, nothing like your family went through. But for the grace of God, somebody didn't offer my daughter a fentanyl pill and have her take it and go, wow, I want to do that again.
Mm. Yeah. The naivety is something that I think we all share because for years we didn't understand my brother had a problem. He would drink but I didn't know. I found out later he would like it wasn't just when we'd watch a boxing match together or watch a football game, we drink. He'd drink by himself. He'd drink at home and he'd get blacked out in his apartment by himself. And looking back now, I'm like, well, you can see how it built into heavier stuff, but we had no idea. And we knew that he'd smoke weed, he'd smoke joints with his friends, but we didn't know he was getting into that harder stuff. He hid it from us because he knew we'd yell at him.
Right. But think about this. So if you're a family that condones drinking in your teenage child or condones regular marijuana use in your teenage child, and you're used to them being under the influence, how are you going to notice when they're under the influence from something much more dangerous?
Yeah.
Right. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the reality. I know a lot of families have lost their kids, and they talk to me about what happened and where they think things went wrong. And so anytime I hear about a family kind of condoning, I heard about a story today about a family condoning the drug use, and I'm like, I don't know. I don't have the answer. It's not. I wish I could wave a magic wand and solve the problem,
Right.
but their solution is contributing to potentially something much worse. And again, you can't have any conversation today. And this is what so many parents don't understand. Hopefully, your audience, is getting this. The drug situation for our kids is dramatically more dangerous, incomparably more dangerous than it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago. It's not the same problem. And I think I did the same thing as a parent. When my daughters would have issues as teen, I would think about my life back when I was a teenager and how did I deal with these issues? When it comes to drugs, and so many issues, right? With social media and the phones, we can't think
Right.
like that. But particularly with drugs. My dad was hardcore on drugs. And I did not want to find out what my dad would do to me if I ever went there. But parents when we were young would say, hey, if you use drugs one time, it could ruin your life, right? Which was mostly a lie back then, because the stuff that was available to kids most of the time, use it once, it probably isn't going to end you. Today, we're in a reality where that is happening. Back when OxyContin, back in 2007, 2008, we discovered hardcore OxyContin abuse here in San Diego. Kids were paying $80 a pill, and they were smoking things on a foil. And I talked to all sorts of kids that we would arrest, buying and selling these things. And I would, when did you start? What were you using? And these kids would tell me, well, I'd used everything. They were just like the nonchalant, I would use whatever chemical. And then I discovered Oxy, and I quote, I found what I've been looking for. I've heard that so many times. I found what I've been looking for. And I will say the same thing probably happened to your brother,
I think so.
that whenever he got to whatever opioid it was, he
Yeah,
found what he'd been looking for.
it
And
changed
it worked.
everything.
It changed everything. And it worked for him in a way that nothing else would. There's nothing. And the power of OxyContin and the super potent heroin and the super potent fentanyl operates on your brain's pleasure centers. The same parts of your brain that activate when you win at sports, when you get to go out with somebody beautiful, you make a lot of money. Those are the same chemical zones of the brain that are being activated by these opioids. But nothing in natural life can equal the level of pleasure that comes from taking these drugs temporarily, right?
Yeah,
And then you have the cycles of people's behavior. When they're on the drug, they're up, and when they wear off, they're low.
it
And of course,
crashed.
the body builds up tolerance, so they take more of the drug to try to get back up, but they can't. And then when they come off, they're even lower, and they end up in a life where their general mood, they can't even get to what their average mood used to be. Like their best mood of the
It's so
user
true.
can't even get it to what the old average was.
Yeah. That's how Anthony was. His personality changed. I mean, as much as I didn't like it when he was smoking pot and doing coke and all that kind of stuff, his mood generally was still pretty much the same, as long as he had had a fix recently or whatever. Because he would try to just do it on the weekends. He would say he would drink almost every day, but we didn't know. But man, when he started doing opioids, he changed. He got dark. His face changed. His looks started to change. His aura, all of it. And he almost, you talked before about the emotional development and the stunting in that. There was he almost reverted in a way. His emotional state, his stability, he kind of regressed and was almost acting sometimes almost like a child, like a depressed teenager as a 35-year-old man. It was bizarre to see because my brother, when he was young, was this tough guy. We grew up in a rough neighborhood. We had to learn how to fight when we were young. And my brother was a tough guy. He could handle himself. And he became this really weak person, like meek almost, almost effeminate. It was so difficult and bizarre for me to see. And I never really understood that till you just kind of articulated it that way.
Well, the other thing that opioids do, and before we had the fentanyl crisis, we had the prescription drug abuse crisis, right?
Right.
And so I got to see firsthand what prescription drugs did to people. And so a lot of times I'm out in public and people ask me about drug legalization, and I said, well, we did try that with OxyContin, and look what happened, right? I mean, honestly, we had a legal drug, had to get through a doctor, and people went insane
Yeah.
on it. But I was also dealing with people addicted to Vicodin. The majority of people that I was dealing with were actually addicted to Vicodin, and they were going to maybe 10 doctors a month to get a different Vicodin prescription from each doctor because they needed 40 or 50. Think about this. They needed 40 or 50 Vicodin a day just to not get sick from withdrawal.
It's
They weren't getting
crazy.
high anymore off 40,
It's just to
but they needed
maintain.
that
Yeah.
just to maintain, right? And a lot of these people started from a legitimate injury. They got it prescribed. They were in that percentage of people that activated a different part of the brain and worked for them in a way that maybe it wouldn't for you or me. And they started lying to their doctor and said they lost the prescription. So they started seeing two doctors, and then the tolerance builds up, and then they have to see three doctors. But I call it the trail of shame because they begin lying. These otherwise not druggy people, who kind of accidental addicts, they hide it and they start lying to people and lying to their spouses and their children and their doctors. And when they finally realize that they're addicted, to come clean off the drug means they have to come clean to everybody else in their life they've been lying to, and they get
Yes.
stuck. They get stuck in this vice, and they need the drug. Their brains give it to me, and they're terrified of being rejected by the family or losing all the relationships if they admit their dishonesty. But opioids turn people into amazing liars. And I saw this
Yes.
so many times. It's insane that the opioids steal your loved one. There's a wonderful meme that I use in my presentations. Opioids, you don't take them, they take you. Think about that,
It's so
right?
true.
They're miracle drugs for pain. And I have every recommendation for people who need them to take them. But we have to respect that if you're not careful, they will take you back.
Yeah.
And that's where our society has fallen down. And we keep talking about dealing with the consequences. We keep talking about treatment. We keep talking about Narcan. We keep talking about these things to rescue the people that are already in addiction. And we're almost talking zero. And I'm very grateful to have the chance to talk to you today. We're almost talking not at all about maybe we can get to the kids before they, before they start on this path. And Desmond Tutu had a wonderful quote in South Africa, and he said, "Look, I'm tired of pulling people out of the river. I'm going to go upstream and trying to figure out why people are falling in."
That's
Right.
great. Yeah.
And then also I'll go to schools, and then school staff will say, "Well, what's the drug trend on my campus?" And I said, "I'm sorry, I can't tell you that. I don't know your kids. I don't know what it is today, and it'll change tomorrow." I said, "I don't stay up on that because it changes between communities."
Right.
But I said, "I'm here to figure out why. Why are so many of our otherwise beautiful, healthy, strong kids so willing to poison themselves?"
Because
You
they don't
know,
think that they're going to be that percentage, that outlier percentage that gets hooked.
it's not me. Not going to happen to me. Right.
Right. It's Russian roulette,
Right.
though. It could
Yeah.
be you.
Absolutely. And I don't use any reference to suicide in my talks. I just stay
Yeah,
away
it
from that.
probably would
But
be a
The
bad
Russian roulette thing.
example.
But you're gambling.
But
Yeah, you're absolutely gambling with everything that matters. And I talk
yeah,
about brain development. Think about this. One of the examples I use for the kids. Your brain is the most important organ in the body, right? Everything else keeps you alive, keeps you moving, it takes you to and from, right? Your brain is the only thing that makes you you. Everything that defines you as a human being, everything, your memory, your intelligence, your dreams, your hopes, your passions are in your brain, in this miracle organ that operates on very, very complicated chemical processes. Drugs and alcohol are chemicals we put in our bodies on purpose to alter how the brain functions.
yeah,
That's why you take it. That's what the
yeah,
high is. You've altered your brain. So if you're doing that at the same time that incredibly fragile brain is trying to grow, it's not a doesn't require a lot of intelligence to think that you may be changing how it grows. And
yeah.
that's what science is discovering. So it's teen drug use. My focus, anybody can destroy themselves, but my focus is really getting to the teens and trying to get our society to understand that we have to stop teaching kids as teens it's acceptable because it's so dangerous. I'll use the example of a little plant. All the kids, have you raised a plant from seed? Oh yeah. Okay. Well, what if we pour some toxic chemicals on the roots of that little plant every weekend? How's it going to grow? And the kids, well, it'll be stunted. Yeah, it'll be stunted or it'll die. We all get that. That plant won't be normal. But guys, your brain's 1,000 times more sensitive and complicated than any little plant. So what are you doing at the party when somebody hands you some mystery drug that could kill you or kill your friend or take control of your life and you don't think twice about it? And the kids, and I see it in their eyes, Mike, the kids are like, damn, this guy makes,
He
nobody's
got
played
me.
through like that. You
Yeah,
got me.
yeah.
Right, you got me. And
Is
so
there
that's
I'm sorry, is there a top 2 or 3 points that you hit with kids that you'd recommend for people watching this if they want to maybe show this to their child or just have a conversation with them? Is there 2 or 3 like big talking points that always hit for you that you'd recommend?
Yeah, I mean, one talking point is that our brain physiology is unique to us. And I'll use the example. Everybody, all the kids understand we have a unique fingerprint, right? Everyone knows that, right? Well, guess what? Our brain chemistry is unique to us. And just like I had a bad reaction to a very common antidepressant, you and I could take the same drug and have very different reactions to it because of our biochemistry being unique to us. So you can't look at the people around you and try to assess what the drug is doing to them with any confidence that that's how you're going to react. You just don't know. So that's an insane, logical flaw that so many kids have. My friend's doing it and he's fine, so I can do it and I'm fine, right? That's one argument I try to make. But I have a slide where I call my 3 laws of drug abuse. And first law is drug abuse. I used to say drug use is always a choice at the first. And then I softened that and I say drug use is most always a choice when it starts. I've never met anybody who was forced to use drugs. I've never met anybody who went to a party and someone said, hey, use this, Mike, or I'll beat you up. Mm. That's not what happens. They're at the party, someone they know, someone they admire comes up and puts the drug in front of them and says, hey, look what I got, let's do this. And that young kid at that moment, has a choice. It's, yeah, I'm going to put it in my body and see what the consequences are. Or no, no thanks. Maybe later, I'll think about it. I'm not doing that right now. My dad will kill me. Whatever they have to say to get it. So at some point, it's a choice. And law number 2, the people that make drug use a regular part of their life change in negative ways. I don't care if it's just alcohol or just weed or whatever you want to just call it, and particularly with the harder stuff. Sooner or later, and again, we're all unique. Some people it happens right away. Some people it takes time. You change in very negative ways. That's the second law. The third law, Rocky's law, those negative changes never, ever just affect the drug user. If they did, if the drug user could damage themselves and not impact their family, not impact their community, maybe I wouldn't have a job. But that's not the reality. It's not the reality that your family lived. It's not the reality that most people who are listening today have lived. That loved one or friend or whatever who's put themselves on the path of drug addiction doesn't just affect them. It becomes a family illness. It
Yes.
becomes a community illness. And as a DEA agent, I've been able to see how it affects the individual, the home, the school, the community, the state, the country, and even across the world. I've seen how it's American drug abuse that causes the violence in Mexico. I've seen how it's American drug abuse that causes the violence in Bolivia.
Yeah.
Right. But those three laws they're a pretty foundational part of my message. You guys all understand you choose to start doing this.
Mm-hmm.
And let me show you what happened to a lot of other people. And sometimes if I have time, I'll say, like, when I show that video of all the overdoses, I'll ask the kids, do any of you think you're smarter or brighter than the people in that video? Or stronger than they are? Because I don't think you are. I don't think I am. I have a picture of Len Bias. I have a picture of Len Bias in my video. Died 30 years ago at 22 years old.
Right.
And I tell the kids, if any of you think you're somehow stronger, smarter, more talented than Len Bias was, the next
Exactly.
Michael Jordan,
Yeah.
who died because his friends gave him cocaine to celebrate his big NBA signing, then you'll come up to me after my talk and explain to me how you know that you're stronger than he was.
Right.
And again, when I see the kids, they're processing.
Hmm. Well, how can people see your presentation? Is it out on the internet? Do you have a website?
Yeah, no, I don't. I'm just retiring from DEA. I'll be leaving in the next few weeks.
Oh, congrats, by the way. And
Thank
thanks
you. I
again for your
survived.
service.
I'm a survivor at 31 years.
That's
Another
amazing.
joke I make is this is what drugs will do to you for 30 years. But so I'm going to set up a website moving forward on it. But there was a school I spoke at in Orange County, California, a couple years ago. Did a decent recording of one of my talks. It's on YouTube. I'll share the link with you,
Please
and you
do. Please
please
do.
share it. It's a pretty good representation. And what I ask parents to do is watch it with your kids. Don't just ask your kids to watch it. Sit down, watch it with your
them.
kids. And for every argument I'm making, debrief your kids. Hey, does that guy Rocky make sense to you? Is that what
Okay.
you're experiencing in your reality? How is your world compared to what Rocky says your world is like? And every single audience I go to, at the end, I ask the kids to tell me what they liked, what they didn't like. And I tell them because I need the kids to tell me how to get better for the next audience of kids
Right.
that I talk to. So yeah, I'd be happy if you shared that video, and I'd be happy if everybody would share that with their communities.
Absolutely. I'll make sure it gets out there. I'll make sure of it.
Yeah, and then my hope with the WPC and now NADF that heard me last week, they all got it when I talked about the disadvantages so many young boxers are facing when they come into the world of boxing as young men and women. And my message is one of empowerment. I want to celebrate those kids for making that choice to walk away, try to walk away from whatever bad environment they were in. And I want to empower them with information to continue on that path and to make sure that they don't get pulled back into it. And one thing I wanted to mention as well, a lot of parents don't understand. I call this an insider threat. I think too many parents today have some stupid notion that it's going to be some stranger, that bad kid that's going to somehow pull their kids into this. It's not. It's going to be their best friend. It's going to be their boyfriend, their girlfriend, their older brother. It's going to be some parent that you think
Uncle,
knows what's going on. Uncle, right? It's an insider threat. It truly is. In a world where what that insider is offering your kid could literally kill them the first time they use it, or is so powerful that your child really is going to be psychologically addicted, the first time they use it. So they keep using it until very shortly later they become physically addicted.
right.
And then it's the nightmare that your family lived in.
Man.
So I think the young boxing community is really a good community for me to try to reach. They're all going to understand what I'm talking about. And I'm optimistic that I can add a little bit to help them try to stay on that healthy path.
Well, Rocky, this has been really, really great, and maybe we could do this again. I want to get this out there to my subscribers, and maybe I'll open it up for some questions for you, and maybe we could do a Q&A session or something like that in the future if you'd be
No,
willing.
I'm totally willing. I was doing a live session for the WBC a couple weeks ago, and somebody in the audience didn't like it, and they bombed it with porn, and it was terrible. Had to shut it down. But I made the point, that. And they've done, the WBC told me they've done 5,000 Zoom calls since COVID, and this is the first one that got bombed. And I said, well, this may be the first one where you had a hostile audience, that you had people in the audience that don't want the message. And I've had kids, again, I've talked to so many audiences that I'm pretty good at reading them. I have audiences where the kids are like, they'll put the hoodie over their head, they'll turn away sideways, trying to physically block out my message. And I love that because those are the kids who know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And they're like physically trying to tune me out. So it's just, I'll talk to anybody who'll listen. I will gladly come back and engage with
Okay.
you, engage with your audience. I don't have the answers to everything, but I can be fairly certain that our society is not doing enough to help educate kids. And I'm open to talking to anybody about that.
Yeah, I'm fairly certain on that too. Well, thank you again so much, and enjoy the rest of your day there in sunny San Diego. We're dealing with the remnants of a hurricane here in Atlanta, so hopefully that goes away soon. But enjoy the holiday weekend coming up, and make sure you send me that link. I'll share it. And until next time, my friend, thank you.
Okay, Mike. Nice to meet you, man. Thank you.
Nice to meet you too. Have a good one.